Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, it is fully on and we are deep in it. And we are calling in all of our best friends and superstars to help us make sense of it. And given the particular kind of chaos we are experiencing this week, I could think of nobody better than to bring back a returning champion, a friend of the show, the great and powerful Asha Rangappa is back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you, Paul. I'm glad to be here, though not glad about the circumstances that warrant it.
I'm glad I'm talking to you because, like, in times like this, especially, I want to talk to the smartest people, the most experienced people, most objective people I know. And I think you're one of them. First, I just want to give you props on the really cool microphone.
Thank
Looks like
you.
it came from NASA.
Which is blocking my t-shirt.
I was going to get to that too. Can you
Oh,
tell folks
sorry,
what
I
it's,
didn't.
tell folks what it says?
It says do not obey in advance.
Do not obey in advance. This is more reason to watch us on YouTube if you're not already. But Asha, let's start with that. Why that shirt?
This shirt because we're basically in the middle of an authoritarian takeover. And I don't think that's hyperbolic. And we can talk about the reasons why that is the case. I've been reading and following a lot of the fascism scholars that are out there, Timothy Snyder, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, and Applebaum. And one of the big lessons that they explain about authoritarian, transitions from democracy to authoritarianism is that power is often freely given away, that they see the authoritarian on the horizon and they begin to acquiesce, anticipating what they'll be asked to do later. And so one of the first things is don't obey in advance. Wait until the moment comes where you have to make that choice. And then ideally, there are some, it takes some moral courage at that point to make the choice, but you don't have to make that choice uh, prematurely.
That's so good. I love it. See, more reason to watch on YouTube. Your cat just came in, which is awesome. We're going to need animal spirits in the next couple of weeks to keep us at peace. It reminds, I mentor a lot of people, and sometimes people get in dicey HR situations. And I always tell them, like, if you think you're going to get laid off, like, don't quit. Right. Because then you can get unemployment benefits, you can get some severance. And I think that's a good example of where they're trying to get people to quit. And they're going to take the easy quitters first and then move on down. We're going to talk about the harder to reach people, a lot of folks in the FBI, in the military, and other more entrenched places. But you are a scholar on national security law. You've been an FBI special agent yourself. You work in the media. You understand how to communicate these things. But I want to bring it back to the personal, since your cat is here and we're in your living room. I'm going to have to ask this question a little bit differently. Maybe I usually ask people, where are you and how are you? But in times like this, we might have to talk in generalities about where you are.
Yeah.
And how are you as you navigate all this, not just as a scholar and a strategist, but as a person.
Yes. So I'm in Connecticut. Glad to be in this state at this moment. And I'm actually very distressed, actually. I am very anxious. I'm worried about our democracy. I am concerned as a lawyer because I think what we're seeing right now is something so extraordinary that I'm not sure that our guardrails. I mean, we already knew that the guardrails were weak, but they are designed to deal with a particular kind of situation. I don't even think that the situation that's happening now, that our system is equipped to handle it.
I think that's so right. I mean, I'm bombing away on the Democrats constantly, but also trying to impart to people that the Democrats aren't going to save us. I mean, I talked about this in my intro, but for all their bluster and tough talk, yesterday half of the Senate voted to confirm a nominee for VA secretary who's an election denier. I mean, the Democrats aren't going to save us. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs may not be able to save us this time. Let me just ask you to kind of maybe start at the top. I want to talk about the FBI and I want to talk about the January 6th criminals who've been freed. But strategically, if there is an authoritarian attack happening on our government how do we defend it? Because I hear a lot of people whining and bitching and saying what they're going to do, but they don't really have a strategy. So what is the strategy beyond the Democrats voting against stuff where they're going to get steamrolled and plowed on everything? What is the actual strategy, in your view, to defend our democracy against this takeover?
I think the first thing is that we can't be apathetic and we can't be cynical. So I mentioned right now that what's happening right now, our system isn't equipped to deal with it. Having said that, that's not a reason to throw up your hands and be like, oh, well, because that sort of gets to the don't comply in advance. So we have to believe, the democracy works when you believe that it works, and you have to use every mechanism at your disposal to handle it. And just to look at, for a historical example, I mean, Chile was under a dictatorship for 17 years and they found their way out of it. So if they can do that, we have the possibility of getting out of this. I've been thinking a lot about this concept of dharma, which, is in Hinduism, and it's really about you do the next right step. You do the next right step, and you're not gaming it out for the final outcome, right? So we do need to use all of the mechanisms at our disposal, all the legal mechanisms and peaceful mechanisms at our power. I think, you're much more on kind of the political lane, but I think, Democrats need to obstruct everything at this moment. To have as much leverage as they can, and at the very least to slow things down, because one thing that helps in this kind of situation, especially in something as fast moving as this, is friction, is just slowing things down, creating some roadblocks and obstacles that make it harder, even if it seems like it's the end point is a fait accompli. I also personally think that Democrats in Congress need to start documenting this as articles of impeachment. Again, don't game this out. It may not go anywhere, but we are at a point where certain things, that might be the only historical record we have of what happens, because we are seeing websites being taken down, actual facts. As far as I'm, you know, aware, we still have evidence in the Justice Department, but that could get destroyed too. So we really need to start documenting this in all the ways that we can. And I think, the states, I believe, are going to have to play a big role in this, because that is one big buffer litigation that they can bring, because there is standing in a lot of these things that are happening. But Paul, I think, as you said, all of these things aren't going to save us. At some point, I think the people are going to have to make their voices heard, if it means going out in the streets to do it.
I think your point about focusing on the next thing is important, but the Democrats are so discombobulated and shattered that they can't focus and prioritize. So, I mean, I thought that the first thing I said after he was sworn in was stop Hegseth,
Yes.
right? Because Hegseth was the first one up. He was one that could be stopped. He wasn't inevitable. And they came close, right? They lost by one vote. And that was what Trump was doing to kind of bust open a hole for the follow-ons. Now we've got Collins has gone through and Noem has gone through.
And Bondi,
Yeah,
another election denier.
and your point about slowing them down, even if you lose, I think is important to try to reduce their momentum. But kind of strategically, it seems like the Democrats are saying, "Hey, we're gonna fight you on this," when they're already inside the wire, right? They've lost headquarters. The enemy has infiltrated every element of your base, and now you're trying to just reclaim little holes of power. And the Democrats are acting like the Republicans haven't taken over already, right? Like they have fully taken over, and they've got the gun closet. And that's where I want to move to, is like I said, if you're going to break into a house and try to take it over, you go for the gun closet first. That's the Defense Department, right? Where you've got the nukes and you got the Army and you got the National Guard, and you got all this, and the FBI, right? So now they've gone all in on the FBI, and that attack is underway. Can you lay out for us what is actually happening at the FBI right now, and how it could be the first of a series of dominoes, and maybe the first of signs of resistance? The military, nobody's really spoken out yet. There's no CQ Brown who's resigned and stood up as a leader. I feel like a leader could rise from one of these people that are removed from the FBI. But can you talk specifically about what is actually happening at the FBI and why it's so dangerous?
Yes, the FBI, I think, is the best example right now of friction. So the acting attorney acting Deputy Attorney General at the Justice Department, Emile Beauvais, sent a request to the FBI leadership requesting the names of all FBI agents who had anything to do with the January 6th investigation, with January 6th prosecutions. Now, Paul, that is the largest investigation in the Department of Justice's history. It involved people who came from all across the country in order, to attend this rally that ended up in the mob attack on the Capitol, which means that all 56 field offices, thousands of agents, including staff and, analysts were involved in this because their lead sent out is just a sprawling investigation. And it's very clear from the letter that was sent that the purpose of getting this list is to essentially purge these people and summarily dismiss them, possibly even make their names public so that, they might be targets for, mob violence. I mean, all of these January 6th defendants that they prosecuted are now at large, and many of them viciously attacked law enforcement officers. There were two big groups that were convicted of seditious conspiracy for having, basically military style plans to take over the Capitol. So, this is a huge risk for these agents. The acting director of the FBI, Brian Driscoll, who goes by the Driz, who, by the way, is sort of accidentally in that position because the Trump administration messed up in their press release or website announcement on who they were putting in that role, and they put his name in, and they're like, "Oh, you can just stay there until we figure it out later." Well, it turns out that that was very serendipitous for us because he said that he wasn't going to turn over these names without following FBI procedures and policies, which have civil service protection for FBI agents. Let's remember that these agents didn't do anything except investigate actual crimes, which is what they're sworn to do. The last I have heard, well, first of all, there have been two lawsuits that have been filed, a class action lawsuit on behalf of these agents, as well as another lawsuit on behalf of the FBI Agents Association and 7 senior FBI officials who have already been fired. And the last development that I know of is that the Driz did, comply with this request, but only by providing a list of the agents who worked with on January 6th by their employee identification numbers, so without any names attached. And the lawsuits are asking for an injunction to prevent the Justice Department from releasing any names. But again, that's kind of friction, right? Because they have these IDs, probably Justice Department can match them up and create a list, but it's extra work. And what Brian Driscoll is doing is kind of staying within the bounds of the law as much as he can, as he is required to do, but to also protect the interests and the independence and mission of the FBI.
So what's the nearest comp to this, in the scope of this investigation? I think I heard you say something like it could be as many as 40% of people at the FBI were involved in some way. And it was September 11th maybe a comp for the scope and scale of the investigation? Or do you have a sense of how we can peg it to something else in terms of how many people were touched by this across the entire machine?
I suspect that this touched more people than even September 11th. September 11th involved a relatively small number of actual participants, who may have been in different places in the U.S. And of course, those offices would be involved. And that would be, the Pent bomb investigation that was being run out of headquarters. But, this involved 1,500 plus individuals. So, gathering evidence on all of those people, going through hours and hours of the footage to identify that all of these things take so much more resources, technicians, analysts, forensic analysts, in addition to the actual FBI agents. I don't think that there's an analog. I could be wrong, but I do, based on just kind of what I see on the face of it, I would think that this was even larger than the pet bomb investigation.
And just to kind of simplify it, Asha, basically it's blowing their cover, right? It's like, hey, imagine if you have thousands of undercover cops, or you have CIA agents, which may be comps that we have to talk about soon, but basically putting them all out there, leaving them hung out to dry. And I wonder, is there a strategic opportunity for the opposition here, Asha, in that I go back to Iraq under Saddam. When we hit Iraq, Bremer made the controversial decision to disband the military and all people who were Baathists. And what that did was send all the Baathists with guns out into the streets to become the insurgency, to become the opposition. Is there an opportunity in this? Well, let's take it all the way through. Thousands of FBI agents are fired. They're potentially made public. They're pretty smart, sophisticated, organized, networked. I mean, is this a group of people that we could see in the streets, that we could see organizing some kind of peaceful resistance, and really the lead element in defending our democracy in a very it's like Wyatt Earp. I mean, we're looking at them to try to hold the line here as the Cowboys try to take over the town.
Yeah, I don't know what it would look like if these people all got purged in terms of, what they would do. Right now, they are acting as sworn law enforcement officers. And it's really important for us, for them to stay in that position as long as possible, because that actually gives them the federal authority to enforce the law. And right now, there is rampant law breaking happening right now in Washington, D.C. And as far as I'm aware, the FBI might be the only real enforcement agency that we have left. So I'll just add something here, and maybe this is sort of the flip side of your question, which is, if these people were to be purged, it would not only be 42% of the FBI agent workforce, it would leave a huge vacuum across criminal investigations, cyber investigations, counterintelligence investigations, counterterrorism investigations. Investigations would be just left in mid-investigation. I mean, there would be a number of critical threats that would be left unmonitored that put the US people, the American people, in grave danger. At that point, there would be pressure to fill those spots. And my guess is that the next FBI director is not going to go through the thorough vetting process that, the FBI currently has. They can literally fill those spots with anyone they want. You know, not only just people who are loyalists to Trump, but possibly even convicted criminals like the pardoned January 6th folks, like the Proud Boys, like the Oath Keepers. So imagine that as our federal law enforcement officers, these people with badges and guns. That to me is potentially where we're headed if the Justice Department is successful. I mean, I think that the FBI agents would be law-abiding people who would, I would hope, join any kind of, peaceful action that could resist this, but that they are also very spread out across the country and in different agents.
I mean, the Democrats are like, I see Democrats on TV talking about the midterms. I mean, the midterms is so far away right now, and this is so immediate. I think the country is looking for leaders to rise in the same way so many people were rooting for Robert Mueller or rooting for Jack Smith, right? There's this feeling like there will be a charismatic leader or leaders who rise to fill this hunger that the country has for leadership. And it feels like the FBI could be the place. But if Trump's goal is just to grab as many levers of power as possible, then exposing our national security and making us more vulnerable to criminals, that doesn't matter because he's flooding the zone, which includes, I would imagine, making it harder for the FBI to do background checks on people like Hegseth and Gabbard and Patel and Kennedy. So I want to ask you to go back to that because in my view, it looks like they kind of hand jammed the FBI investigation on Hegseth. I mean, I don't know how it's going to unfold with Gabbard and with Kennedy and with Patel, but have we ever had this light of an FBI investigation and this much of a need for an FBI investigation around nominees for the cabinet? Because we're talking about what would normally be disqualifying for most people. But we're depending on the FBI to give us good background checks while the FBI is getting attacked by the guy who's pushing for them not to have background checks.
Right. I think we saw something similar with the Justice Kavanaugh nomination. where the White House limited the FBI's ability to investigate leads. So one thing that's important to understand is that background checks are run out of the administrative division of the FBI. They are not criminal investigations. In a criminal investigation, FBI agents are authorized kind of independently to utilize every investigative method to, basically go to the endpoint until the matter is resolved. In an administrative background check, they are actually providing information to a client. So it could be another agency. In this case, it's the White House. The client determines the parameters of the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So the client, the White House here, could say, we just want you to interview these 5 people and collect whatever they say, and if there's derogatory information. And what the FBI does is there's something called the adjudicatory desk reference, where based on what they collect, they make an adjudication of whether the person is suitable or not suitable for a position of public trust. However, that's kind of a recommendation, and the client is free to accept or reject it. So basically, this is just a kabuki dance that the White House
That's really
gone through.
important, right? I think this is so helpful. This is why I'm so glad you're on with us to explain this, because, if I wanted to do a thorough investigation of, for example, Pete Hegseth, I would talk to all his ex-wives. Looks like they didn't speak to all his ex-wives. And if Trump says, don't speak to the ex-wives, they don't speak to the ex-wives. They are, in this case, they're not fully empowered to protect even their own agency, right? So the FBI investigators who are conducting an investigation on Kash Patel probably are going to go through a more rigorous background check than Kash Patel himself.
100%.
Yeah, that's where it's upside down. And I think that's where people, I hope, of integrity, even within the Republican Party, will ring the bell. I mean, you're talking about people. Yeah, you're talking about people who wouldn't get a security clearance, right? Like they would be denied security clearance, but they're going to be in charge of an agency that grants security clearance to millions or thousands, right?
Yeah, Kash Patel is not sitting for a polygraph. FBI agents sit for a polygraph in order to even make it into the bureau, and then sit every 5 years for a full, counterintelligence uh, polygraph to make sure that they're not a national security threat. They have to constantly disclose their finances. I mean, they're foreign contacts. I mean, there's, as you know, I mean, you know this, Paul, a
Yeah.
lot of, there is no way that someone with the background of, frankly, any of these nominees would get through a top secret background check clearance.
I think that's really important because there's so few experienced national security and military and law enforcement voices in the media, right? I've been harping on this for years. We had the Iraq and Afghanistan war, and very rarely did you have an anchor or a reporter who had been in the military. Similarly, now we have some lawyers, but we don't have people with the expertise to understand how background checks work, how security clearances work. I mean, I've had a number of FBI investigators call me over the years because I've had so many people go for jobs where it was required. And they had me down as a reference, and the FBI guy would call or come by my office and say, I want to talk to you about this person who used to work for you, and find out what kind of person they were. And they would ask me, do you know if they have any financial vulnerabilities? Do you know if they have any foreign contacts to anyone who would do harm? And I remember the questions because I've gone through it so many times, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's a really important time for people to not only be outraged, but to be informed about what the actual process looks like. I mean, I just want to send all the support and love to the FBI I can. I mean, I've spoken there before. I used my FBI cup today, right? Because I really do think that in this moment, people are looking for a place to hold the line. And if frankly, the Department of Defense is already tumbling with Hegseth in place, the FBI may be the next beachhead. So to that point, is Patel going to get through in your view? And if he does, what does that mean? Like in the most simple terms. I know we could talk about, but it's so unprecedented. He's so dangerous. He's so radical. Do you think he's going to get through? And if he does, what does that mean?
I don't know, Paul. I mean, I was shocked that Hegseth went through. I don't understand what Republicans are, it seems like they would too have an interest in just maintaining kind of a baseline uh, level of competence and qualifications for these jobs just to keep their own constituencies safe. And, in terms of background and qualifications, Patel does not, I mean, apart from all of the other kind of Trump loyalist stuff, he just doesn't compare with who we've had. And even William Webster, who's one of the former FBI directors, who also was a director of the CIA, has come forward saying that he does not think this is a person that is suitable to lead this mission. So I don't know if he will make it through or not. I will leave that to the political analysts. If he does, it could be catastrophic, and for a couple of reasons. So, as you just mentioned before, just in terms, and as I talked about the vetting of current agents, all of that is just, he can do away with that. Those background checks that you're talking about, there's a mnemonic in what the FBI checks for. It's called CARLA F BAD, which stands for character, associates, reputation, loyalty, ability, finances, bias, alcohol and addictions, and drugs. Those are all the things that are checked, and that's what, you're screened for. That could be done away with. We don't, and by the way, the president can actually grant security clearances to whoever he wants. So again, in terms of who's coming in there. More importantly, the FBI doesn't have a legislative charter. It is a creation of the Justice Department. And the rules that it follows are rules that are promulgated by the Attorney General. They are called Attorney General Guidelines. These came out of the church hearings in the 1970s. Congress decided to not put, legislation in place. They decided to trust the Attorney General and the Department of Justice to basically create guardrails. Those rules can be changed. They can be rescinded by the Attorney General. And those are the rules that basically put limitations on the kinds of investigations that you can open, the standards that you need to, or the kind of um, level that you need to meet in terms of the information you have to open an investigation on, on a US person, for example, to engage in certain kinds of techniques, like how far along and what you need to show in order to do that. That can be done away with the stroke of a pen. And then you basically have an agency that has carte blanche to do anything. And, sure, if they are to get to court, there will be due process protections that kick in. But there's a huge runway, Paul, between when you start an investigation and all the techniques that you can do, whether it's surveillance, rummaging through people's trash, you name it, that can be very harassing and intimidating, even before it ever gets to the point of actually being charged with a crime.
It's I kind of referenced it earlier. It's like Tombstone, where like you can just start handing out badges to anybody, right? And either it's going to be Wyatt Earp and the Earp brothers, or it's going to be the Cowboys and those guys. And I mean, Carla F. Bad is so important. I think you need to do an entire segment just on that and go on every show and explain it, because it's really clarifying. I mean, the idea that you could literally be a drug addict and be empowered with a security clearance and a weapon, I would imagine, right? And a badge. And this is how you create a ground force to
100%.
execute an authoritarian regime. And when it's complemented by the Secretary of Defense, this is how it gets rolling. And education and treasury, all that shit's going to be easy when you've got the guys and the gals with the tanks and the guns. And I think you're right. It's not alarmist to talk about these possibilities, because the one thing I think there is a real failure of imagination that the FBI is kind of trained to make sure they don't have happen on everything from September 11th to January 6th. But now that the January 6th assailants, criminals, whatever, I'm gonna call them fucking criminals, insurrectionists, are now released. One has been shot and killed by cops. One's been arrested for being an online child predator. I think another one got shot and maybe killed the other day. Is it at the point now where law enforcement just has to wait for them to fuck up again so they could arrest them for something else?
Pretty much. I mean, they're free. They're free. Then and their firearms ownership rights have been restored as a result of this. So most of these people were convicted of felonies. A felony disqualifies you from lawfully purchasing a firearm. And so, I definitely saw people that were being interviewed immediately after the pardons that said, the first stop I made was to go get my gun. So these are not only people with criminal histories, in many cases who engaged in violent behavior, but people who now have completely free access to firearms.
Mm. I want to, we're going to end with something positive, a Super Bowl prediction. I think I'm going to give you a couple rapid fire questions for our Patreon members. Thank you to our Patreon members for supporting. If you're not already, subscribe now on YouTube, Spotify, everywhere else. Be sure definitely to subscribe to Asha's Substack, her podcast, everything else that she does, which is brilliant. Asha, you're really great at putting all the pieces together. And that's why I really appreciate talking to you. Where do you see a leader or leaders rising, right? And in these authoritarian moments, you have an opposition, a resistance. I look across the board and I'm like, who's cracking through? And it feels like I'm going to put a point on AOC, right? Because AOC knows how to be kind of a multi-sport athlete. She's not just, screaming on MSNBC, but she seems to be getting to people and moving people and uniquely charismatic and effective. But she's kind of a known quantity. Is there someone or group of people where you will look to rise to this moment? I mean, you mentioned, former FBI leaders who are going to speak out against Kash Patel, and then they're going to write a letter, and they're going to get noted on and pressed for a day, and then it's going to be like all the former secretaries of defense who opposed Hegseth, but are quiet now. So, where is a new generation or a new crop of leaders, in your view, going to come from to meet this moment?
I think that's a great question, and I've been thinking about it too. I mean, I do think that Brian Driscoll at the FBI is kind of uh, epitomizing that kind of thing. And so, he's sort of the model of what we want to see organically come up in other contexts. One thing that I think about though, Paul, is, you can unify people and inspire them, get them mobilized around a person, but you can also do it with an idea. I mentioned the Chilean example before, right? The Chilean example was there was no like singular leader, really. It was a coalition across the opposition movements who all came together and they created a cohesive message that was going to lead to this referendum. And it was basically, it was called the No campaign because they were voting on whether to keep Pinochet in power or not. And, and they really kind of created, it was a marketing campaign that kind of showed what the future would look like without Pinochet. And it was, it's actually a TV commercial with like, people dancing in the streets and, music and running across meadows and all this kind of fun stuff. I think like, I think it can be a person. I think it can also be a coordinated message that gets people rallied. And I wonder if the latter might be more effective in our media ecosystem, which is so fragmented.
Yeah.
That, having a message to go viral or an idea or hashtag, whatever it is, might gain more traction than a single person because they just can't, especially in the Trump years where he sucks all the air out of the room. I just don't know that a person can compete necessarily.
Yeah, there's also something I've been watching, which I will predict could happen, which is someone like Rubio, who is close, who is all in now, who in a month could get fired, could just quit, and someone who Trump has trusted again could quickly turn against him and then try to be this voice of reason because he's been inside, right? It's the Scaramucci effect here on steroids. But I don't think many of these people are so loyal to him that they won't break ranks with him in a month or 2 months and try to create their own opposition from inside. It even could be somebody in his family. That's not unprecedented if you look at history. So I look to those areas. But let me conclude, Asha, the Super Bowl is this weekend, which is fun and a relief, but also a massive national security risk, right? And probably a massive lift for the FBI. And now Trump says he's going. And it's in New Orleans, right, where they just had a terror attack. And if you've been to the Super Bowl in New Orleans, I have, you know that the Dome is kind of in the middle of everything. So it's a hard place to guard. And Trump is going to be there after having experienced an attempted assassination, after this week saying he wants to plow Gaza and turn it into a Bedminster golf course. I mean, every day he's pissing off the world, and we're pissing off the world. So if I'm a bad guy, Super Bowl looks like a pretty good target. So can I ask you the weirdest two-part question? Number one, just break that down from an FBI standpoint. And then who do you think is going to win, the Chiefs or the Eagles?
Um, I mean, from a security perspective, I would say, look, the FBI is going to do their job regardless. Even if they're pissed off at him, I mean, they're going to go. Their duty is to the American people, and there are a lot of other people there, obviously, that they are there to protect, and they're going to be working, coordinating with Secret Service, and managing. It'll be a special events detail that's there, and with local law enforcement, they'll be working too. So they will do the best they can. But I think you point out very astutely that, you know, Trump has been very provocative, and is almost like poking the bear. And it is, the Super Bowl is sort of a soft target, right? Like it's a place where there's a lot of people. And so it's just not a very smart thing. And it's the kind of thing that if you were to decimate the FBI, would then become it would just become high risk activities, really, I think, because you would not have people would know that you don't have the kind of resources to protect those things.
And unusually, you're telling everybody exactly where you're going to be and when.
Right.
Right? Which is like 101 and what not to do.
Yeah.
All right. So when he finally gets there, I don't know how big of a football fan you are, but this week everybody has to have an opinion. Chiefs or Eagles? What do you think, Asha?
I don't. So you clearly have not gotten to the end of the last podcast that Renato and I
No.
recorded, because yeah, you'll see that I'm not totally up to speed on, Super Bowl. I'm kind of agnostic. But what makes it good is I'm a tabula rasa, and I am totally willing to get on board with basically whoever I'm with. I'm sort of a Republican Super Bowl watcher. Like, I'll just somebody tell me what to do, and I'll go along with it, no questions asked. So who are you rooting for? And that's who I'm rooting for.
I'm rooting for the Chiefs because I
Okay.
can't root for the Eagles, and I'm picking the Chiefs because I think experience and strategy and being tested in the fire matters. And I said it last week with our guest Dan Lamothe, and we were talking about it. But I think this is one of those times where you've got a super stud on the other side in Saquon Barkley for the Eagles, but you got a machine on the other side that is the Chiefs. The Chiefs kind of run like America used to run. Like it used to be predictable and steady and awesome. It's not quite where we are right now, but yeah.
Well, the
So
Chiefs, that they have the player that Taylor Swift is dating, right?
Travis Kelce, yes.
Okay, so that's good enough for me.
There you go. I mean, and just like, again, I think everything is national security. You've also got Taylor Swift there, who the other half of the country hates. And like, I mean, if you want to put everybody who people are really pissed off at in America in one place, the Super Bowl more than inauguration is pretty much it, right? I mean, that is a giant, tens of thousands of high value targets in one place, which is just on a national security level daunting. So I am thankful for your help in guiding us through all that is daunting. You're such an important voice, especially now. You're at this really critical intersection. And I keep saying, everything is about national security. And
Yeah.
you have been teaching that for a long time. And we're going to need your wisdom and guidance more than ever, Asha. So thank you for all you're doing. It's a tremendous public service, and you're a great patriot.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for all you do as well.
All right, you're gonna come back for a couple quick fire questions. Thank you to Asha. Check her out everywhere and stay vigilant.